Welcome to Life Stories, where the people you trust most are sometimes the ones who take everything from you. She was 22, brilliant, and had just inherited a $120 million tech empire. But what should have been the greatest day of her life became the start of a silent war. A war fought not in courtrooms or boardrooms, but at the dinner table between bloodlines and betrayals. This is a story about power, legacy, and the kind of courage it takes to stand alone when even your own mother chooses the wrong side. What if the man trying to destroy you was sleeping in your house, wearing a wedding ring with your mother's name on it? Stay with us, because once the truth begins to surface, you won't be able to look away. And now, let's go back to the beginning. Brooke Carter never wanted to be a CEO. Not really. At least, not yet. At 22, she imagined she'd spend a few more years building her own path, earning her stripes outside the towering shadow of Carter Dynamics, the billion-dollar tech empire founded by her grandfather, Henry Carter. She envisioned herself quietly climbing, not suddenly inheriting. But everything changed on a crisp September evening in Marin County, when Henry stood in front of 80 guests at her birthday party, clinked his glass, and handed her the keys to the kingdom. "Effective immediately," he'd said, his voice as steady as the gaze he leveled at the man standing beside her mother. "Brooke is the new majority owner and CEO of Carter Dynamics." The applause was polite, stunned. Brooke blinked at the roaring fire pit behind him, half expecting this to be a joke. But Henry wasn't the joking type. And Nathan Cross, her mother's smooth-talking new husband of 4 months, had stopped smiling. By the end of that night, the mansion that had been Brooke's safe haven as a child felt foreign, sharp-edged. She overheard hushed voices behind closed doors, saw Nathan whispering into Vanessa's ear, his hand possessive on her waist, saw her mother nod. It wasn't just jealousy, it was strategy. And Brooke realized then that some wars don't start with gunfire. They start with toasts. The weeks that followed blurred into something surreal. Nathan began showing up at Carter Dynamics uninvited, calling emergency meetings, introducing himself to board members as a strategic consultant. Vanessa, once absent-minded but harmless, became increasingly brittle. Her conversations with Brooke clipped and transactional. Brooke's keycards stopped working. Her executive email was deactivated. Rumors swirled through the company. She was too young, too inexperienced, emotionally unstable after her grandfather's erratic decision. But Henry knew. He had always known. He'd raised Brooke after her father died in a car crash. It was Henry who taught her how to calculate compound interest before she could legally drive, who brought her to boardrooms in sneakers and let her sit in on product pitches while other kids her age were still figuring out algebra. "Integrity is your inheritance," he'd tell her. "The company is just paperwork." But integrity, Brooke was learning, didn't matter to everyone. One rainy Thursday, as she packed a duffel bag at Henry's guest house, her new home since Vanessa suggested she move out, he slid a file across the table. It was thick. Too thick. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. "Nathan Cross," Henry said, folding his hands. "Real name, Nathaniel Kravitz. 2 former marriages. 1 bankrupt cosmetics line. 1 lawsuit from a previous mother-in-law. And several meetings with DG Future executives, our direct competitor, including one where he offered to sell them our quantum security blueprints for equity and a seat on their board." Brooke stared at the photographs, the flight records, the transcripts of conversations she hadn't even known were possible to obtain. "He married your mother for access," Henry said gently. "He never cared about her, or you." The betrayal hit like a brick to the chest. Not because she hadn't suspected it, but because it was now undeniable. Proof. Tangible and damning. And somewhere beneath her anger, beneath the sharp sting of disillusionment, was the ache of a question she couldn't shake. Why didn't Vanessa see it? Or worse, did she? "I'll fix this," Brooke whispered. Henry didn't smile, but he nodded. "You'll have to." The next morning, Brooke walked into Carter Dynamics, not as the heiress people dismissed, but as the threat they hadn't expected. Armed with legal contracts no one else had read, hidden clauses that gave her and Henry dual consent over all executive actions, and a digital paper trail of Nathan's lies, she was ready to face the board. But what she didn't expect was what she found in the executive lounge. Vanessa, crying, alone. "I didn't know," her mother said without turning around. Her voice was cracked, distant. "Not really. I thought he loved me. I thought maybe this was our second chance." Brooke said nothing. The silence stretched. Then Vanessa turned, and what Brooke saw wasn't the woman who'd tried to push her out. It was the woman who'd once slept on the hospital floor with her after a bike accident. The mother who used to pack notes in her lunchbox, who once told her, "Don't let the world turn your softness into armor." "I think I ruined everything," Vanessa said. Brooke felt something shift. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something less rigid than rage. "I'm not the one you need to say that to," she said. But Vanessa had already sent a message. Because when the board meeting started, Nathan looking polished, smug, ready to launch his rehearsed speech, he was blindsided by a single voice. Vanessa's. "I'm here today," she began, voice clear over the hum of confusion, "to formally withdraw my support for Mr. Nathan Cross. He does not represent this family, and he does not speak for this company." The silence that followed was volcanic. Nathan's mask cracked just slightly, and that was when Brooke stood, and everything shifted. What would you do if the person meant to protect you handed you over to the enemy? Can loyalty survive betrayal when the betrayal wears your mother's face? As Nathan's empire of manipulation begins to crumble, Brooke prepares for a public reckoning that will expose more than just fraud. It will reveal who in her life is worth fighting for. The next move? It's hers. Nathan didn't flinch when Vanessa spoke, at least not at first. He leaned back in the leather chair like a man who'd already calculated every move on the board. But Brooke could see the tightening at the corner of his jaw, the twitch of one finger tapping the table. He hadn't expected this. And that meant he was afraid. Brooke stood slowly, locking eyes with him. "I think we've heard enough rhetoric," she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. "Let's talk facts." She nodded at Logan Barrett, the company's legal counsel, who began distributing manila folders down the long table. Inside were meticulously documented records, photos, emails, phone logs, connecting Nathan to executives at DG Future, the tech rival he'd secretly tried to sell Carter Dynamics R&D data to. Some board members flipped pages in stunned silence, others shot each other wary glances. Nathan's smile curdled. "This is a smear campaign," he said, his voice suddenly louder, more desperate. "None of this proves anything. It's circumstantial at best." Brooke didn't take her eyes off him. "You offered to trade proprietary information for personal profit. You attempted to undermine the succession of leadership with forged memos and locked me out of the company I legally own. But the worst part, Nathan, is that you tried to weaponize my own mother against me." She turned briefly to Vanessa, who couldn't meet her gaze. "You don't belong here," Brooke continued, her voice hardening. "And you never did." Then Henry spoke. Though his voice had grown weaker in recent months, in that moment it filled the boardroom like thunder. "Nathan Cross, if that's even your name, you are hereby barred from all Carter Dynamics properties and assets. Any further attempts to interfere with company operations will be met with full legal action." Nathan stood, hands clenched. "You can't do this. I have rights. Vanessa and I are still legally married." "Not anymore," Vanessa said, rising from her seat. Her voice shook, but her chin lifted. "The papers were filed this morning. I already gave the settlement away. There's nothing left for you." And in that instant, Nathan's mask broke entirely. For a breathless moment, he looked like a boy who'd lost control of the game he thought he'd rigged. Then the security team stepped in, flanking him. As he was escorted out, he twisted around one last time. "You'll regret this, Brooke. You don't know what you've started." But she did. The boardroom emptied slowly. Some executives offered handshakes, others just nodded, subdued and shaken. Vanessa left last, quietly, her heels clicking against the tile like an echo of a past Brooke wasn't sure she could forgive. Henry stayed seated, watching the skyline fade into dusk. "It's not over, you know," he said finally. "People like Nathan, they don't vanish. They wait." "I'm not afraid of him," Brooke said. "I'm not talking about him," Henry replied, eyes still distant. "I'm talking about the people he wakes up. Greed, Ego. They've seen a chink in the armor now. A young CEO with enemies in the press and allies still unsure. The real battle starts tomorrow. That night, alone in her apartment, Brooke sat on the floor with a cup of tea gone cold, the folder of evidence beside her. Outside, San Francisco glowed, soft golden light over steel and ambition. Her grandfather was right. The public showdown had been a victory, but also a declaration of vulnerability. There would be whispers, articles questioning her competence, investors asking if her leadership could weather storms that hadn't even arrived yet. And beneath all of that was a quieter, sharper ache, her mother's betrayal. Even with Vanessa's brave pivot in the boardroom, there were years of absence to reconcile. Brooke remembered waiting at school recitals, glancing at empty chairs, remembered the way her mother used to call from different time zones, always promising next time. And now, even after siding with her, Vanessa had offered no explanation, no real apology, just a soft glance before vanishing into the elevator. Was she a victim or a willing accomplice? Did it matter? Brooke curled her knees to her chest and let the silence answer. She was CEO now, daughter second, and any softness she kept would have to live in secret corners of herself, guarded. The next morning, Logan Barrett arrived with urgent news. DG Future had made an aggressive move, an open bid to purchase Carter Dynamics shares from public investors at a 20% premium. The media was already buzzing. The hostile takeover Nathan had once promised was still in play, only now without him and with deeper, more invisible hands pulling the strings. But that wasn't the worst of it. Logan opened his briefcase and handed her a letter. "We found this in Nathan's email archives," he said grimly. "It's from one of our own." Brooke scanned the printed message. Her heart dropped. One of the board members, someone who had shaken her hand just yesterday, had been feeding information to DG Future for weeks. They hadn't cut off the snake's head, they just exposed one of many. As she folded the letter, her jaw clenched with quiet fury. The fight hadn't ended. It had just grown more sophisticated. What would you do if the person smiling across the table was the one quietly plotting your downfall? As a deeper conspiracy threatens the future of her company, Brooke must decide whether to lead with trust or tear down everything to protect what's left. The next move will demand more than strategy. It will test the core of who she really is. The rain didn't stop for 3 days after the letter was discovered. San Francisco shimmered in gray, the sky like brushed steel, the city breathing quietly under the weight of storm clouds. Brooke Carter stood at the window of her corner office, her reflection blurring in the glass. Somewhere in the fog, a rival company was calculating her downfall, and someone she trusted, someone who had smiled at her across the boardroom table, had handed them the keys. Trust was the most expensive currency she had, and it was running out. Logan identified the traitor by Thursday. William Mercer, a legacy board member and close friend of her grandfather's for decades, had been leaking confidential expansion plans to DG Future. His motive wasn't money. It was fear. He believed Brooke was too young to lead, that Carter Dynamics needed stability, and had offered inside information in exchange for a seat on DG Future's new advisory council post-acquisition. When confronted, William didn't deny it. "I did what I had to do," he said coldly. "This company has always been about vision, not emotion. You weren't ready." Brooke didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply asked him to leave. But when he was gone, she locked the office door and stood in silence. And for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel the weight, not just of betrayal, but of grief. Not just over her grandfather's absence, but the slow realization that power and family don't always exist in the same room. Sometimes they can't. She reached for Henry's old notebook, the one he'd scribbled ideas in for years. Inside the back cover, in faded pen, he'd written a single sentence. "If they question your place at the table, build your own table and invite the world." That night, she made a decision that would change everything. At sunrise, she stood on the stage of Carter Dynamics' main auditorium, the same place where she'd first introduced herself as CEO. Hundreds of employees filled the room. Reporters had been invited. Cameras were rolling. This company has spent the last 4 decades building technologies that protect people, Brooke began, her voice clear. But now we have to protect ourselves from the inside. She exposed the internal leak, named DG Future's takeover attempt, and announced that Carter Dynamics would be filing a federal injunction against any hostile acquisition. But she didn't stop there. In the coming months, she continued, we will restructure. We will strengthen our board with diverse, transparent leadership. We will open our data transparency initiative to our clients and investors. And most importantly, we will remain independent. Not because we fear being acquired, but because we believe value is rooted in how we lead, not just what we sell. The room erupted into applause. But in the front row, Vanessa Carter sat silent, eyes fixed on her daughter. There was something new in her expression, no longer guilt or sadness, it was awe, and perhaps, finally, pride. After the presentation, Brooke approached her quietly. I know this doesn't fix anything, Vanessa said, but I'm here now if you'll have me. Brooke hesitated. The wound wasn't healed, but it didn't bleed anymore. You were wrong, she said softly. You let him choose for you. Vanessa nodded. But I'm still your daughter, and maybe we rebuild one dinner at a time. The moment was fragile, like glass held between two trembling hands. But it didn't break. Weeks passed. DG Future went silent. The court had blocked their offer. Investors rallied behind Brooke's bold pivot, and Carter Dynamics stock surged higher than it had in 2 years. The media began calling her the Iron Heir. She worked harder than ever, but she laughed more, too. She had coffee with interns. She took meetings on walks instead of in boardrooms. And every Thursday night, she and Vanessa met for dinner. Sometimes it was awkward. Sometimes it hurt. But it was something. Then one evening in early spring, Henry didn't show up for their usual Friday check-in. She drove to his home, found the lights off, found him in his chair, his favorite jazz record still playing, his notebook resting on his chest. Peaceful. Gone. The funeral was small, private. She didn't speak at the podium. She spoke later, alone, sitting by the tree they'd planted when she was a child, reading aloud the notes from the last quarterly report he'd never finished. That night, she found a letter in his safe, addressed to her. In it, he wrote not of the company, but of legacy. He wrote that he had never worried about whether she would succeed, only whether the world would be worthy of the way she'd led it. He reminded her that courage wasn't noise, but endurance, that trust wasn't given, it was proven, that the weight she carried wasn't a burden, but a compass. I gave you Carter Dynamics because I knew one day you wouldn't just run it, you'd rebuild it. The last line was in all caps, bold, underlined twice, do not become me, become you. It rained again the next morning. Brooke stood alone at the window, the city blurred by tears and glass, but she didn't feel small anymore. She felt real. And in the quiet hum of the office, in the storm of everything she'd lost and gained, she finally understood what her grandfather meant. Leadership wasn't the crown she'd been handed. It was the road she'd walked, the scars she carried, and the people who stood beside her not because of power, but because of belief. Brooke turned from the window and walked to her desk. She picked up the phone. Eric, she said to her CFO, we're going to double our STEM grants this quarter, and I want a full audit of the board policies. No more secrets, no more shadows. We build something new, starting today. And just like that, the girl they once dismissed as a name on a title page became the author of an entirely new chapter. What part of Brooke's journey resonated most with you, and why? If you love this story, comment 100 below. Let us know what country you're watching from. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a reminder that strength often starts in silence. Thank you for watching Life Stories.